Hey again YouTube, back with another Vita retro gaming video. Now I don't want this to become a Vita specific channel, but I will be doing a few more of these as I set things up for myself on my system. Today I'll be going through and installing Retroarch, which is a graphical front end for LibRetro, a multi-emulator system. LibRetro packages emulators into what they call cores, which are essentially programs recompiled and repackaged into a single file. This makes it easy to add new emulators and update existing cores as changes are made, since many of the cores in LibRetro are still under active development. There are LibRetro cores out there for virtually every popular system, but they won't run on every device. Much like other software, LibRetro cores need to be compiled to run on the target system. That means you won't be able to drop in a Dreamcast core from, say, the PC and have your games run. For that, you'll need to try out something like Flycast on the Vita. By the end of this video, I'll ideally have some organized ROMs with box art, bezels, and customized playlists with dynamic wallpaper setup. Most importantly to me, I'll be running an up-to-date version of Retroarch with the new DOSBox Pure LibRetro core. DOSBox Pure allows you to load and run DOS games from zip files, supports automatic controller configuration, and has an excellent on-screen keyboard for quick input. That should make it a bit more convenient to use than the original DOSBox SVN core. We'll take a look at that a little bit more later when we get there. First, I'm going to go through installing and configuring a few settings to get Retroarch up and running quickly. Later I'll be looking at setting up custom playlists and downloading some box art and screenshots to display on the ROM lists. I'll go through a couple methods of downloading complete packs of bezels that are ready to use with many of the cores in Retroarch. Bezels are the little bit of art that surrounds the screen in an arcade cabinet. It's a nice touch to fill the black space on the Vita screen. Though if you have an OLED screen Vita, be careful that you don't get screen burn-in because the bezels are a static image. You can find Retroarch on any of the Vita homebrew installers or on their GitHub page. Here I'll be installing the nightly build of Retroarch using Easy VPK. The download and install process can take maybe a half hour, so I'll whiz through it with time-lapse. Be sure to also download and install the required data files. After both packages are downloaded and installed, Retroarch is ready to run. The initial startup takes a little longer than normal, so don't panic and think your system is frozen. The interface controls can take a little getting used to, but they make sense once you get the hang of it, though the defaults can be configured to your liking. Navigate with the D-pad or left joystick and use the circle to select and cross for back. Retroarch is highly configurable, and the number of settings can be a little bit daunting. Most of the options can be left as defaults if you want to get up and running quickly. One thing you want to be familiar with is the button combination to bring up the quick menu. To set up the menu button trigger, navigate to the input configuration and the hotkey submenu. Here you can change the default menu toggle controller combo. By default, the menu will be triggered by pressing L1, R1, start and select at the same time. There's no way I'm contorting my hand to do that. Start and select or down and select are my preferred choices. You want to pick something that you won't accidentally be pressing in a game. Here you can also set a hotkey trigger button and hotkeys for things like save and load states. I prefer to use the quick menu itself for in-game functions because I find trying to remember various button combinations a little bit difficult. Scroll down to Port 1 controls and you can see how the Vita gamepad is already pre-configured. I don't recommend changing any of the main Retroarch configuration settings here unless you really know what you're doing. The settings here propagate to the installed cores, which can have their own controller settings, and it's easy to mix things up and get conflicting inputs. One setting that seems convenient but may end up messing with your bezel settings later is save configuration on exit. If you're going to be using custom bezel settings like I'll be doing later, disable the save configuration file on exit setting. Manually save your configuration file from the main menu every time you change a setting. A few of the things I'm going to fiddle with here may not be under the basic options. Go to the user interface settings and set Show Advanced Settings to On. Under this menu you can also show or hide individual elements of the user interface to make things as clean or as cluttered as you like. To speed up browsing for ROMs, you can also change the file browser startup directory under the directory settings. Set the file browser start directory to wherever your ROMs are stored. Later we'll be back in this menu when we configure some bezels. If you want to get some performance indicators when using Retroarch, you can enable a screen frame per second display, and that's found under the on-screen display settings and on the screen notification submenu. Here you can toggle the frame rate display and various UI messages like the things that pop up when a ROM is loaded. To load a ROM, from the main menu, scroll down to Load Content. Browse the Vita file system and find the ROM you want. In my case, we'll try Battletoads for the Nintendo Game Boy. Once you select a ROM with a known file type, Retroarch will give you a list of cores it thinks will support the file. You might want to keep note of which core you're using for which system or which game. Each can have its own configuration options, configuration file, and feature support. The associated core can easily be changed when the ROM is loaded though. So Battletoads loads quickly and runs well with the TGB Dual Nintendo Game Boy emulator core, but that's pretty expected. Let's bring up the quick menu, close the game, and try loading something else. If you loaded a game before, it will show up under the History playlist. Later I'm going to use either the History playlist or the Favorites playlist as a template to create a multi-emulator playlist with custom background and thumbnails. So let's load up Bunk's Adventure for the TurboGrafx with a different core. I'm going to go to Set Core Association and I'll choose the Beetle PCE Fast Core and then select Run. The capture on this is a little darker than it should be, but that's a me error. You may also notice a slight blur when compared to the menu interface graphics. That's the bilinear filter setting, which I normally turn off. Some people think it makes things look like a CRT monitor, but I just think it makes things harder to see. I generally prefer the crisp pixel lines that are easier to discern. More demanding games like WWF WrestleMania Arcade Port for the Sega 32X run great out of the box. Other games like Virtua Fighter and Primal Rage for the 32X run a little bit slow. Using frame skip or adjusting rendering settings can sometimes be enough to make them playable, or you can try overclocking your Vita. To keep things tidy, Retroarch can organize your ROMs into playlists by system. Later, playlists can be configured to display game art and dynamic backgrounds if you're using the XMB theme. To scan ROMs into Retroarch, browse to the Import Content menu. Here, the first two options will attempt to automatically match your file or files to databases in Retroarch. If you have a normal ROM set named according to the standard no-enter naming conventions, things will probably match some of the included databases. A manual scan allows you to use an XML or DAT file to add extra information not included in the database, or to apply filters to your import. I'll scan in some Atari Lynx ROMs to show you how it works. It slows down the process quite a bit, but you can scan multiple directories at once. This is handy if you're going to be away from your Vita for a while. If you select a manual scan and specify as many options as you can, the scan will be significantly faster because Retroarch won't be attempting to match the ROM against every system in its database. Once a directory is scanned, your ROMs can be found under the Retroarch Explorer menu or in the newly generated playlist. The Retroarch menu is modular, similar to the rest of the system. The default menu driver is Ozone, which currently lacks a lot of customization options. I'll swap it out to the GLUI menu and restart Retroarch to give you an idea what that one looks like. I like this menu for the box art and info display. It's also pretty responsive, even with a ton of ROMs. The GLUI driver has a few configuration options that can be found under the User Interface Settings menu. Here you can select which icons to display and how artwork is shown. You'll probably want to change the primary and secondary thumbnails to be two different images if they're not already set that way. When browsing through the menu in GLUI, you can toggle various artwork displays with the square and get a few different sizes of thumbnails. So things already look a lot better when browsing ROMs, but let's make them look a little bit better when playing them by adding some bezels to our setup. One option for getting a complete pack of bezels is from the Bezel Project. Bezel Project was originally started to supply bezels for RetroPie, but now supports Retroarch on a ton of systems, including the Vita. To utilize the Bezel Project, we're going to download the Bezel Pack utility for Windows from the releases link on their GitHub page. I'll have a link below in the description. Currently, however, the Bezel utility breaks all the bezels for the Vita. Retroarch expects the file name of the image to exactly match the name of the ROM. The Bezel utility generates config files that match the name of the ROM, but the image file names contain underscores or dashes instead of spaces. Retroarch never looks for the PNG referenced in the config, but rather only looks at the ROM name. I don't understand why this is, but it's the way Retroarch behaves. If you follow the naming conventions and instructions on the Retroarch page to the letter, you won't run into this problem. The page does say the image name has to exactly match the ROM name. So be warned that the Bezel utility is currently broken. Check the GitHub page to see if it's been fixed. Once it's been fixed, this is how things should work. Be sure to read the documentation for the utility because things may have changed since making this video. Select option 1 to download your bezels. Open Preferences and select your PC's local Retroarch install under the Retroarch box. Create a new directory on your PC and set that as your Vita download directory. Ensure the option to process for Vita is selected. Hit OK and you'll be prompted to select various systems. These take a long time to download and can take up a lot of space on your Vita. I recommend selecting only systems you intend on using. Multiple systems can be selected by holding down the Control key when clicking. Keep the application open after clicking OK and Bezel packs for the selected systems will be downloaded to the directory you set as your Vita directory in Preferences. The program may look like it's frozen as it downloads, but it will flash some info up as it's processing files. Inside that directory we set as our Vita directory, you'll find a readme.txt file with final install instructions, which are basically copy the two folders to your Retroarch folder, open the Retroarch settings, and select the appropriate config and overlay folders. But given that the Bezel utility is currently broken, we're going to have to do a manual installation using the Bezels provided by the Bezel Project. So head over to the Bezel Project GitHub page again and find the link to the repos. Browse to the repo for the system you'd like to install Bezels for. There are two varieties for most systems, Bezel Project and Bezel Project SA. The SA files seem to include a console and cartridge image for most artwork. Many of the repos have a preview, so that does help. Hover over or click the Download Code button to find the download zip link. Right-click and hit Save As, or copy the link if you're using a download manager. For download managers, I like uget or PicoGet, which you can find at ugetdm.com. Now, I'd recommend doing this next step on a hard disk or flash drive that you really don't care too much about. Depending on how many systems you're going to process, you could be working with hundreds of thousands of very small files. It's a lot of wear and tear to be hammering on a drive like that. Extract the zip file with the Bezel pack or Bezel packs you want to use. Next, we're going to use a handy feature of the text editor Notepad++, which is linked in the description below. Load up a game Bezel configuration file and take note of the path name. The portion input_overlay equals opt/retropie/config/all/retroarch/overlay is common to all the game console config files. So we're going to copy that to the clipboard. Now open up Notepad++ and under the search menu, select Find and Replace in Files. Inside the Find What box, paste the string from earlier, and in Replace With, put input_overlay equals, quote, lowercase u, lowercase x, 0, colon, /data/retroarch/overlays/, and under Filter, put star.cfg. And specify the base path where you extracted the Bezel Project overlays. Triple check that everything that you've entered is correct and hit Replace in Files. After the magic of time-lapse, we can see that Notepad++ processed 4,450 files. That's a lot of files. Now we're going to copy them over to the Vita. Retroarch organizes Bezels according to emulator core names in its database. Each core folder has matching game config files. We want to copy the files over and merge the folders but not overwrite any existing config files in the folder. Rename the overlay folder to overlays and copy the config folder to data/retroarch on your Vita and the overlays folder to data/overlays. Do the same for each system that you processed with Notepad++. The process for setting up arcade bezels is similar, but the path name is different. Arcade bezels, and anything emulated under the arcade systems, are merged under the arcade bezels folder. These will work for FB Alpha, FileBurn Neo, and MAME. The other way to get a big pack of bezels is a little bit more sketchy, but maybe more convenient if you like a pre-configured system. The CrazyMac PS Vita Ultimate Retro Pack is a pre-configured RetroArch installation complete with ROMs, playlists, and custom backgrounds. There's a torrent link available on the ArcadePunks website, which I'll link to below. After downloading the CrazyMac pack, copy the custom RetroArch build to your Vita and install it through Vita Shell. After the installation is complete, copy the gpsp_libretro.self file included in the pack to the app/retrovita folder using the copy and paste function in Vita Shell. And that's really all there is to setting up the CrazyMac pack. This is a really great pack of classic games with really nice artwork, and it's set up to run very well out of the box. Unfortunately, the build of RetroArch it's based on is more than 2 years old and doesn't support the new Libretro DOSBox Pure Core. One thing we can do is simply install a new build of RetroArch and the new data files right on over top of the CrazyMac pack. Most of the pack will keep working, but you lose a lot of the core associations, and the configuration file in the CrazyMac pack disables a lot of the configuration options, so you will need to go through settings and enable them again. You may also end up with some duplicate options in your config file that you'll have to go through and manually remove. Take a look at the menu item visibility submenu to enable the favorites menu, show the import content menu, and enable the core downloader. Also look at the user interface menu for any other customizations you may want to make. You'll also need to reconfigure your UI controls if you want them to be different than the ones used in the CrazyMac RetroArch build. But I wouldn't recommend going this route. I think it's probably best to just copy the graphic assets from the CrazyMac pack and do a new install and set up from scratch. I've copied some of it over here, mainly the playlist and dynamic wallpaper setup. I'll poke around at some more of the finer customizations later. So RetroArch is installed, relatively configured, and has working bezels. What next? Let's see how we can play some MS-DOS classics on the new DOSBox Pure Core. I've got a few DOS games zipped up and renamed with the extension DOS-Z. This one is labeled Doom 2, but it's actually the shareware version of Doom 1. And not a particularly interesting title to try emulating since there are already great ports, but I think it's a good example of trying to run an installer within this core. Load up the .dosz file the same way as you'd load up any other ROM, and tell it to use the DOSBox Pure core. Scroll down to the install.bat file and hit the circle key to run it. If you find that input is unresponsive, bring up the quick menu and scroll down to controls. Change your device type to generic keyboard bindings or try one of the mouse with analog stick options. Bring up the on-screen keyboard. I set mine to trigger with the select button. I'm going to install it to drive C, tap enter, and create a new directory. The game will install just like it's running on a real DOS machine. Now this is going to take a little while, so I will speed it up with time-lapse. After installation, the setup program automatically launches and we can use the on-screen keyboard or a configured gamepad to navigate through the options. We'll set up the Sound Blaster emulation using a base address of 220, IRQ7, and DMA1, and configure the game to either use the keyboard or a combination of the keyboard and joystick. Let's go down to save and launch, and here we go. So yeah, it's Doom. It's on virtually every platform, and there are already ports of it on the Vita. But it's DOS Doom, and it's running. That's cool. Let's try something a little bit more interesting though. I want to see how well Doom 2 works with DOSBox Pure. Played it a bit using the DOSBox SVN core on the Vita and it worked alright, but needed quite a bit of fiddling to get running smoothly. I'm just going to set this up to use the Sound Blaster digital audio for now, but you should be able to use the MT32 emulation if you have the required ROM files in your system path. I forgot to turn off the bilinear filtering again, so the capture is a little bit blurry. Here's a bit of the intro and gameplay so you can get an idea of how it runs.
The planet Arrakis, known as Doom. Land of sand. Home of the spice melange.
You can make playing a lot easier by configuring your movement attack to be the hotkeys on the control face buttons.
Construction complete.
Another game worth looking at is Jazz Jackrabbit. The Jazz games can sometimes need a lot of tweaking to get running well in DOSBox. I'll set this up with Sound Blaster 16 audio using the very high quality setting. And as you can see, it runs pretty great within the 0.20 version of the DOSBox Pure core. I'm just mashing buttons here trying to get some screen tearing and sound skipping, but the system keeps up fine. And now, a public service announcement from a half-shirt army lady.
A very important warning, Sergeant. Do not, under any circumstances, throw grenades while facing a wall or some other structure. As you can guess, the grenade will impact the wall in front of you and go off.
Sound advice. The CD version of Terminator 2029 plays well if you configure controls to something sensible, which I didn't do in this video. One game worth looking at is Epic Pinball, since it may have a couple issues that you'll encounter running some other games as well. In the sound setup, I'm going to select the highest quality and then run the game by selecting the pinball.exe file. Well, that runs like garbage, doesn't it? And it's not a game setting issue either. You'll need to change the timing mode setting in DOSBox Pure. Open up the quick menu and find the emulation options. Change your timing method from old mode to new mode. Save a game override configuration file or a game directory override if you want this to be the default. Then restart the game. Game directory override files will apply to all games loaded from within the folder. If you organize your ROMs by system, this is a good way to apply unique options to each system, and it's sort of a requirement given how we have our bezels configured. If you find things are still running a bit strange, try changing the emulated system speed. You can find that under Performance options found under the quick menu. Select Auto if your system speed is set to anything else. This cleared up any of the timing problems within Epic Pinball for me. The last one I want to look at here is One Must Fall 2097. This one ran really smooth. I loaded up the installer and used the on-screen keyboard to navigate through the install options. Quit from the installer and launch the sound setup. I just used the medium quality setting, but I think it plays fine with the ultra high quality setting as well. And then I hit save and exit. And then from the DOSBox menu, I select the omf.exe file to launch the game. Eventually I'd like to try this with the Gravis ultrasound emulation, but as it is, it plays great. If you find yourself stuck in a situation where Retroarch is in a loop where it crashes immediately upon load, here's how to fix it, maybe. Load up a shell like Vita shell, and navigate to the Retroarch folder. Rename or delete the file retroarch-salamander.cfg. That should get you back in, and then you can try loading your game with a different core. Many of the overlays can be configured with a custom viewport to make the display fill more of the window. It's a pretty involved process, and most of the time I just use the core provided scaling or one-to-one output. I really like the dynamic backgrounds feature of the XMB theme, so I'll make sure that's set up and enabled. Retroarch dynamic wallpapers are named exactly as your playlist is named with the extension .png, and are ideally cropped to 960 by 544 for the Vita. You can also use mainmenu.png, explore.png, settings.png, etc. for the various built-in menu backgrounds. So this is what a partially configured XMB theme looks like. Now let's try switching over to the Ozone theme and take a look now that we have some ROMs loaded. This one's really grown on me lately. It's really speedy and responsive, and I like the large thumbnails and zoom option. This is running a little bit long, and I don't want anyone to get lost in the weeds, so I'll cover playlists and thumbnails in a much shorter part 2 that I should have up very soon. In that second part, I'll also talk a little bit about cores and how to lock them and back them up once you're satisfied with your setup. If you happen to post a question about anything I've covered in the video before the second part goes up, I'll try to get an answer out to you in the video if it needs any visuals. Even though it's outdated by today's standards, the Vita is still my favorite retro gaming device because of all the great homebrew out there thanks to the open source community. If you found this at all informative, hit the subscribe button below and leave a comment. It feeds the algorithm that gets the videos out there since I don't really post these anywhere. Thanks for watching, I'll be back with part 2 soon.